Hello, everyone, and welcome to our final speaker series of the semester. My name is Julie Coleman, and I'm here with Danielle Mezzanato, and we are your graduate student coordinators for speaker series. I want to thank Dave Evans for his musical number we just heard. So that's Dave on the harmonica, and he was playing COVID Blues and Boxcar Shuffle. And it's a little bit of improv from Dave, so something you're never gonna hear the same way twice. I'd also like to thank everyone for joining us. Today's Slido code is MOVESS. And also, if you have any questions during the talk for our speaker, if you would please direct them in the chat box, and then we'll address them at the end of the talk. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Danielle to introduce Joe for us.
Thanks, Julie. And before I introduce Joe, I also just wanted to give a big thanks to everyone who's made Speaker Series possible this year. With that, we have Keith Christensen, Marianne Anderson, Alyssa Chamberlain, Deandra Harps, Todd Johnson, and of course, Julie Coleman as well. So thank you everybody that's been working behind the scenes for the Speaker Series Committee to really get this moving in a time when we're shifting to a virtual world and making it really quite a success. Before we get to our speaker, I'd like to introduce someone who will be introducing him. And while he may not need an introduction, Joe Porter is joining us today. And in 1970, Joe collaborated with Don Ensign, his close friend at Utah State and classmate, to start Design Workshop. The firm just celebrated their 50th anniversary with offices across the United States and works domestically and internationally to increase social equity, amplify connections to nature, and bring joy to everyone through design. As an educator, he has been an assistant professor in landscape architecture at Louisiana State University and North Carolina State in Chetlam University. He lectured at Gloucester College of Art and Design in Cheltenham, England, and adjunct professor in the graduate program of landscape architecture at the University of Colorado in Denver. Joe has spent his career working with new communities, natural resources, and resort developers to advance the art of community development through design. He is a fellow of the American Society of Landscape Architects and a past board member and president of the Landscape Architecture Foundation. In 2008, he received the ASLA Medal for lifetime achievement in the profession. And the medal is the highest honor awarded to by the American Society of Landscape Architects. For the past 20 years, Joe has also contributed his time to work with his high school alma mater, Wasatch Academy, a 130-year-old college prep boarding school in Mount Pleasant, Utah, to prepare a strategic plan and establish a process for the school to work toward a sustainable future. Joe graduated from Utah State University in 1963 with a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Landscape Architecture and received a Master's of Landscape Architecture from the University of Illinois in 1968. In 1990, he was awarded the Distinguished Alumni Award by the Department of Landscape Architecture here at Utah State University. This award was followed by the 2012 College of Agriculture Distinguished Service Award, which is given annually by the College of Agriculture here at Utah State. Joe now lives in New York City and periodically returns to Utah to work with the Wasatch Academy, and he also participates in some of our studios here at Utah State. Thank you for joining us, Joe, and we look forward to you introducing our speaker today.
It's really a pleasure to introduce Bill. In looking at this introduction, I realized that, I hate to say this, but 59 years ago, I was finishing my last year at Utah State, and John Hall, another landscape architecture student, and I drove one summer to Michigan State University to a 5-week summer school. And you have to at that point in time, the landscape architecture program at Utah State was very small. We were housed in 2 rooms in the basement of Old Main, and really didn't have a lot of connection with what was going on both coasts. So John and I went to this program, and we had five different segments. Bill taught 1 week, Hideo Sasaki and taught another week. Norman Carver, an ecologist. Brian Hackett, an ecologist, taught the next week. I mean, there were really some giants in the profession at that time, and it was great exposure to us. But I think Bill was the highlight and had a lasting impact. He taught really the essence of how do you look and record the landscape. And we did his exercises, simple exercises in quick sketches, small sketches, and using very spontaneous chalk drawings to just simplify everything that we were working on and really emphasize the essence. And over the years, I saw Bill do this, not only at Michigan, but in most of the schools in the United States. When we first met him, he was opening his office and getting it started. It was very successful. He was teaching at the University of Michigan, and he took time during that period, which was very hectic. Took time to periodically visit all of the schools of landscape architecture in the country. And I asked him why you did that, and he said he was looking for talent. And on one of those trips, he ran into Don Ensign, and that was why Don went to Michigan, and that's why Dave Bell followed. And that happened in schools all around the country. And I've been to ASLA meetings and other meetings with Bill, and I'm astounded at how, from those first trips, how many people he knows personally. And that was a period of time when, the profession was just getting started, and he was going around the country teaching the essence of landscape architecture or of design, and that simple process that he approaches to look at the landscape and design it. I think he's going to talk to you about his process of framework thinking, and the framework thinking, it deals with creating a context at a larger scale that would be strong enough to influence the details as things actually get built. And it's been extremely important to our firm. Jane Jacobs, a known urban writer, wrote once that development wasn't a collection of things, it was a process that yields things. And that process in landscape architecture and landscape planning, regional planning, is very difficult. And Bill's design process speaks to that process. So I think it's extremely important in the profession. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to my old friend and mentor. I'll forget my friend and mentor, Bill Johnson.
Thank you, Joe. You bring back great memories, of course. And as I think about Don Ensign, it makes this title of this talk so important to me, because he was a believer in what I'm going to try to get across in the next 40 minutes. Insights on the practice of design. Don had those insights, and I saw them when I came to Utah State in 1963 or 4, I don't know which year that was. And I was recruiting, and I found Don, and he was talking in terms that I knew were full of promise. So he did come. Next slide, please. and we can get a peek at Don as I took his picture one day. There you go. Now that was a long time ago. And I snapped that picture. I forget the gentleman on the left, but there's Don on the right. I'll never forget that. Many, many times over the last 50 years, Joe and Don and others gathered and we had great fun. So it's pretty special, Joe. Thanks for coming in and introducing me, and we both can talk about Don. I consider this talk pretty much a tribute to Don Ensign and his memory. So go with us, Don, and listen in. Next slide. I thought about the many hundreds of things that could be said today, and I picked out two that are prominent in my mind and important to my life of professional service. One is the design process, as Joe introduced it. It's essential to know this so well, and I'm going to talk about that in 2 or 3 pieces to come. And then secondly, I want to demonstrate to you what was important to me to discover in terms of win-win outcomes and what they look like. They do happen. They are rare, but they do happen. And I have 2 of them here I'd like to show you in the end, 40 years apart. And they're the same basic system of thinking. It's kind of fun to do. Next slide. So given the tradition of landscape architects working in a process-oriented way, we know, as you know, that because of your orientation to the natural systems and your teaching that you have in that sense, and the kinds of things you learn have context-oriented meaning. And that's what has led me to so much to the framework thinking idea. We're all about context. And there is no one better prepared than landscape architects to be at certain times the leader of the process in the start to finish length of time. Landscape architects have a special role. And I want to talk about that a little bit. Next slide. Here happens to be a photograph of myself and Clarence Roy and Carl Johnson, my brother. The 3 of us started in 1963 to develop a business. We had promised ourselves 10 years earlier that we would do that. And in 1963, we settled in and began that process. We had one fundamental thing we kidded each other about. And we say it so often, we laughed about it, but we were serious about it. If we're going to do it, let's do it right. That was essential in our relationships. So everything that came up had to do with doing it right. And one of the things that we did, and it probably was the main activity in our professional growth in those years, was to look into what were the principles that would take to develop a strong business. And not only the principles, but what is meant by excellence? What do you mean when you say, let's do it right and let's do it in an excellent way? We wanted to know what that bar was and to be on that level if possible. And I want to show you, next slide, please, the things that we talked about. And I have a list here. There are 9 pieces that are developed here, 9 principles. We call them precepts. And I want to go over them quickly because I don't have the time to go in each one, but I'm going to be covering a couple of them more in depth. The first one being the playing field. You got to know who you are. The second being the basic equation. This is our working arrangement that we all inherit. And I want to talk about that basic equation. Leverage is being there early. It's like the real estate of location. You must be in early to have an impact, or you won't have a chance. Then spatial language, the ability to picture what you're thinking, not only yourself, but mainly other people. What are they thinking? What's in their heads that they can't quite get out? And you can help them get it out if you're skilled at spatial language in a way that they admire. Then in terms of the process is the search. This is the process. I want to talk about that. Vision building. We're all involved in that. It's inherent in the process. And it's an automatic in terms of having to learn to do that. The bones, this is the structure of framework thinking. Do you know how to pull out the bones of an idea? That's a key piece of learning. And then the completion of design to protect. That's an initiative, not a defense. That you have to get out early on that and get at it in order to protect the things that are delicate. And then out of all that comes form discovery. It's a result, and it's a beautiful way to work. So let me go on with the basic equation. Next slide. The first evidence of that in our discussions in our office, Carl and Clarence and I often sat down and made sketches like this that were in our minds. This one happens to be the collision between Earth and people. And that red line that's vertical is where that collision occurs. And it's when the needs of people who think they need something meets the question of, does the Earth have a capacity to take it on without damage? That's the problem. And this particular diagram represents what I call the professional arena that will be your lifelong place to work. This is not the only arena. There are other arenas that have to do with environmental care and protection of the Earth. It's kind of like the Olympic multi-circle signature. We have that here too. There are multi-arenas. This is one. This is the one that we have to deal with. Next slide. We doctored that up a little bit into this diagram. We use it all the time in the last 15, 20 years, having to do with this equation of, on one hand, the need to build, and on the other hand, the need to preserve. You see those two. And the outer edges of each of those are the advocates and the activists who are aspiring to high levels of quality in both of those arenas. And then the degree of bargaining that goes on having to do with compromise. Most propositions of a developer coming in and offering to build, and then the designers who are there to accommodate that building, but also protect the natural systems, they're usually giving up on one hand and bargaining downward, diminishing their aspirations. It's necessary and automatic, and probably 90% of the projects start with the idea you're going to lose something. So the least you can lose is sort of the high bar. But The problem with that is that if it gets rolling and you begin to compromise in greater degrees, you can lose or lose big and then probably win big. Those are almost, that's a sport for the courts. It's a place not to get if you can possibly avoid it. So the real key to this diagram is the yellow line that goes across horizontally. And above that is a win-win. If you can move the negotiations to achieving more than you even dreamed, more than you aspired to, then you begin to get into the win-win arena. Next slide, please. Our idea, JJR, and all the firms that were produced or coming out of the 1960s, 1970s, the dream was this: win-win ideas where the earth wins and the development need wins. It's a negotiation upward rather than a negotiation downward. Next slide. Given that kind of proposition, that you are living in an arena that is a negotiation arena in the design process, the idea of who am I begins to come up. I'm sure in your program here you've dealt with who you are, but I think it's something to work out over the next 3 or 4 years for each of you, that you need to find your place in this particular arena that I just mentioned, the professional negotiations. Then next slide, if you can show that, you begin to get a picture of what is it that exists in my desire to be a landscape architect or an urban designer. What is it that determines who I am? And it has to do with the supply of knowledge and research that we all use in landscape architecture on the outer edges: the natural sciences, the social sciences, the visual arts. And this diagram is another one coming out of the coffee talks, saying that you are going to be in the middle of a wide range of people who are dealing with the problems that you can't cover. You need friends, you need colleagues. And from this day forth, you'll always be in concert with other people, other professionals, other science-oriented researchers, the applied scientists that come in and give you a hand. They're invaluable. So you'll always be involved in working in a creative way with other people. Next slide. This diagram shows that in terms of the several dots, and this is a little more of refinement to that diagram. And the thing I want to show here very quickly is that there are many places for you to be in this professional world you're in called landscape architecture. It's a design field, but its beauty is that it's a profession characterized by many edges. And those edges are in the sciences, in the urban systems, and the law, and the ecology, and behavioral studies. Those are places that you don't habitate, but you need people from them to come in and join you with the work. So your design characteristics never change wherever you are. So if you flip through the next slide, that's another place to live and be as a professional, close to the natural systems. This one is over connecting the visual arts with the urban systems. And another one having to do with my choice of a life that's related to the urban systems. Those were my choices. It's good to know who you are. The earlier you can resolve that without hurrying, the better. It helps to define who you are and what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. Next slide. So given that, the interesting thing next is the process. And I want to focus on that a little bit and show you a little bit of the essence that goes on with design process. Next slide, please. Here is a simple diagram that compares the typical upper version of a process with the one I use all the time, the lower one. And I want to introduce this sequence because I use this diagram so much. It's not unlike the average typical 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 process that all architects and urban designers, planners, landscape architects go through to define a work pattern for the team. But I want to look then at the lower process and just pick out the 6 or 8 items that it represents. And you, I know, have your own version of this. Every designer program does. And first, it's the understanding the need, where you get leadership involved early in the game and so on. We call it the leadership summit. And then the vision, building a vision, using the insights of stakeholders and talking about intended outcomes, the building up towards the vision. And then the analysis, the pulling the problem apart in its pieces, understanding it in pieces, leading to concepts, leading then to preferred plans, evaluation, costs, bidding, and building. That process is all that diagram is. And remember that it's iterative in nature, analytic in rigor, and creative in spirit. The most important word to me in those 3 is iterative, because that is the cycling of idea building and framework building that you can go back and recover lost notions. It's every circle is a return to the circle before. That's called iterative. It's a crucial quality. And I trust that you talk about that quite a bit. Next slide, please. There are 2 points that the landscape architect has particular influence in that process. One is early, and the other is later. Pretty simple. But the early version and the later version tends to represent 2 different mindsets. And I've noticed it in 1960 when we were working with problems, and I noticed it in 2019 working with problems. It doesn't seem to change much. The early mindset, those who are involved in the upper circle that I'm showing, are tending to be visionary, willing to deal with things that are not clear yet, willing to deal with insights that are on the build rather than being set. The other mindset is in the lower end of that process where you get the pragmatists. They say, come on, we've spent enough time on that, let's build. How hard is that? Get to cost, let's move. And there's a tendency for that diagram to be fragile enough to split in 2. Next slide, please. and break. And it has to do with the mindset of folks who are anxious to get it done and find little assurance of the visionary notions that are being built in the early stages. In fact, many people in my experience I work with would just as soon start with the lower end of the process and go right into the building of the ideas. They think that they're fine enough, that get them built. The problem is that, of course, the vision building of the early stages can be put into the closet and set aside and not used to the point where the built result can be lacking of vision. And it's the typical way in which a community can get lost. The key to correcting that is to see the two ends always working together. That process of working together is so crucial. Next slide, please. And the landscape architect has so much to offer in this issue. And I put it down here in these blue words. They're very important to me, and I almost say them every morning that I go to work. The landscape architect's systems approach to a design mindset is made to order in helping to shape early visionary direction. And you notice in this diagram, this smaller version that's on the right, there's a blue line that is horizontal, and it's called sustaining the early vision. That is a role to be played by the design types that are working together here. The need to sustain that vision is so important. We often call it the keeper of the vision. Landscape architects could very well take on this role with greater leadership than I've seen in recent years. The graphic skill, then, in helping stakeholders find and grapple with ideas is of the highest priority. When the pragmatic folks begin to see the vision in framework terms, that is the beginnings of the form, they're encouraged and they're willing to use it. So drawing with and for others should be a much sought after skill. Next slide, please. So given that idea of helping people to see, the ability to draw is so important. Not draw in detail, but to draw in quick and meaningful ways on the spot and in a way that can change people's minds if need be. Next slide, please. So let me go through some things about drawing before I get to the illustrations of two problems that we solved. Hand-drawn images. I say hand-drawn as opposed to working with a computer. Hand-drawn has a special appeal to people. You can't do it very long in the process. It has to be done early in the game. And it is only a short period where this is true, what I'm talking about, because you're quickly into the computer versions of these things, properly so. But here are the advantages that I've noted and just noted down here to talk about. Sharpen hand, eye, heart, mind, feelings for place. It's not just the hand's connected to the eye. The heart is about the emotions of a place, and the mind is about calculating what that means. It's a cycle that's very important, and we all need to use it. in our field, and we can sharpen it using hand-drawn images. Increase place awareness. When you draw with your hand, you experience places deep inside, and you never forget them. Increase spontaneity of an idea search. If you're good at drawing, you can quickly note an idea that's popped up and help people understand it. Increase trust and easy access to the process. I use pencil a lot and chalk in the past years, mainly because I sensed that people relaxed when you were using a pencil in your hand. It was humble. And it didn't look like it had already been dealt with and it's a solution. It feels like it's in process, and people who are involved with it began to relax and say, isn't this cool? Let me join in. Influence early design directions by being on the spot with these kinds of help to people, and assist others to see, understand more fully, and induce, cause creative dialogue. Next slide, please. So in the end, it is a partnership. The hand-drawn and computer skills, who've done this before in many different ways. I remember working with Joe so often in those 80s, working with various computer programs that were visual in orientation. Remember the Iris, Joe, and other computer investments that were made. They're pretty expensive, but it was a cool period of discovering that computer can do it too, but is not as easily done, and for the maybe not quite the right reason. Next slide. So I say here, just briefly, I don't want to make too much of it because there's no time, but the power of the pencil. It's $1.50 to buy a pretty good pencil. And that's a pretty good bargain when you know that that pencil can change minds, turn things inside out, and work in ways that nobody ever imagined. It can be broad and soft and thin and sharp all at the same moment. And if you know how to do it, ideas begin to form before your very eyes so quickly, and especially when people are watching and want to join in, they are relaxed. Next slide, please. When you do draw, and many of you do and want to do it more and want to do it better, the two things that are the most meaningful to me over the years has been drawing in layers, in the way you see and relate and order things in detail. Drawing in layers means that you lay one thing over another. So when you leave this spot you're sitting in today and walk outside, look at how many things are in layers. The world is in layers. And if you see that way and draw that way, you have a leg up on being able to draw well. The second one is tonal values. There are no lines really in nature. Mainly, it's one value against another value causing a difference, which we call a line, but these are values, areas of tone. Those are the two, layers and tonal values, and you got the rest of it made. And that has to do with composition is important, white, where to put the whites, using grays, not color, early in the game, working fast, and working in a way that each drawing you make, which are many, many of them because you're quick and meaningful, have a purpose. One drawing, one purpose, one drawing, one purpose. And working small is a key to being able to do that because it's so economical. Next slide, please. Now, if you take this slide home and learn to draw with it, if you haven't learned to draw, if you're in the process of learning to draw, this slide does it all for you. There are three principles that show. One, layers. You can't work well without layers. Modifying the tone of each layer from front to back, soft to medium to harsh, hard, and doing it in that order. Always the background first, then comes the middle ground. If you master this little diagram, you're in the ballpark. Next slide, please. There are just simple little ways of working small. I say 3x5 cards is a big drawing. And sometimes when they're done in the way that are showing on the screen, you blow those up to 4 feet by 6 feet, and they're beautiful. What a bargain to spend 20 minutes on a 3x5 card and then blow it up big and it's even more beautiful. That's a bargain. Next slide, please. In every drawing you make is limited to mainly a single purpose. Why do you make this point? The more you put into a drawing that's 10 pieces of what you're thinking, you're going to lose half of them in terms of focus. So each drawing, each point, and it begins to ring and sing in ways that are showing on the screen. Next slide. Any of you use pen and ink, you can do the same thing as pencil. Tonal values with pen and ink, they're just building up strokes. There's nothing to it really. Doesn't matter whether it's pen or pencil. Notice the two big trees in the foreground are just pieces of paper, white paper tape, pasted on after the pen is done, and you paste it on and throw a little pencil on it, and you got big trees in the foreground that you don't have to work around. That's the reason for doing it. You don't have to work around these because they're the last things that go on. Next slide, please. So to put this to bed, I just think that it's important to realize how simple it is and to believe that it's simple enough that you can take these little drawings that are shown here, let them fall to the floor and walk on them because they've done their job when they've been in the battle. People see what you meant. These sketches can be thrown away. They're not precious. And that's an important attitude about drawing with pencil. Next slide. Here now comes, I have a Joe Porter slide. I think. Hello. Next slide, please. Okay. There are two projects that I wanted to show. I'm assuming that I have the time to do this. This is very important to me. This little project happened by chance. The question was, this neighborhood that you can see on the right in the aerial photograph is about 90 homes on the edge of Ann Arbor, Michigan. The city limits are on the far right-hand side of the right-hand diagram. And you can see the traditional subdivision, a post-war subdivision that is one unit right after the other. That is the dream of that year, that age. But this is a leftover township neighborhood that never cared too much about how they looked. They just were very simple homes that accommodated people of a mixed race, mixed income. There's some professors lived here, some who were just workers. It was really a much more dynamic place than we realized. I didn't know the area very well because I hadn't noticed it in my residence living nearby in Ann Arbor. The question was, should this group of 90 homes and the families that lived in them sell out to a developer who was proposing a shopping center, and that he claimed that each owner in this subdivision had agreed to sell to him. And one night I was working late in the office and I heard a knock on the door. And I went down, we were on Main Street. I opened the door and there was a young woman there that I knew from university who was a social worker, and she was in tears saying that she had failed to help save a subdivision from a shopping center. And I said, what happened? And she told me a little bit of the story. And I said, are they still meeting? And she said they were. She thought they might be. And I walked back the 15 blocks to where this subdivision was. Next slide, please. And they were just buttoning up their discussions. This is a photograph I took that night, and they said it's over. And I said, what would happen if you arranged for a private interview with each person and they could vote their heart out, that so that nobody would know what they were voting, so that it would be very private. And I said, there are people who do that, and there are people available to do that. And they said, well, we'll try it. 2 weeks. And in 2 weeks, there was a survey. And the findings, we had the families, we invited all the families into our office in Ann Arbor and announced the results of that survey. And 90% of every owner said they wanted to stay. And I said, well, there's your signal. You've gotten it now, a chore. And so we went to work. Next slide, please. And this is the kind of thing you work without a fee for a while. And here is the condition of those roads. There were back houses still in use. Amazingly, the sites were about 1 acre in size, some larger, some just a bit smaller. And here's a picture of a pastor who was hoping for a new church. It was in shambles. And these are the kinds of folks that really desired to be in Ann Arbor, but there was not an affordable place to be. This was affordable. Next slide, please. So I asked, there's no park, there's nothing for the kids. And they said, no, that's not true. The kids run all over this place and they have a great park, but it's not a park. It's where we have enough allowance to let these folks play. And I said, well, take me to them. And I asked these kids to show me how they played and where they went. And these little shots are sort of indicative of running around after those kids. And they did. They played all over the place, and they had different routes and favorite trees, and it was a delight. It was a wonderful place to live. There was no formality of a park. Next slide, please. So after working extensively with them for a year or so, there was 95% of the original owners remained. And 25 new sites were found and platted because those were the sites that had families that didn't have the means to pay the bill for sewer and water and street improvements. And so this one little sketch over on the left, a chalk drawing, represented their decision night to go ahead and develop further and ask for a block grant, which they got. City of Ann Arbor pitched in with some help on the roads, and we built a new neighborhood. And it's all done. And today, 40 years or so later, it's probably one of the more stable and attractive places to live. And I believe the real estate values are still among the lowest in the community. Next slide, please. Now, given that success, it was a win-win that I never thought could happen. And it was caused by a decision one night that they wanted to go further and make sure of an attitude on the part of the stakeholders. It's where the decision focused on the users. And in fact, they caused the beginnings of a new neighborhood, a restored neighborhood. Next slide, please. This one is nearly 50 years later. University of Washington, along with the Cascadia Community College, wanted a new regional campus at Bothell, Washington, and the state was involved. There was a piece of property that was picked out and paid for, purchased. And then there are some old shots of, this is lumbering country. And there was a log flume that was built to race logs through. And when that is done, it always dries out the upper soil and it becomes buildable. So the log flume helps to make otherwise wetland buildable piece of property. Next slide, please. And this is the site south of the town of Bothell. And it has two pieces to it, an upper shelf and a lower shelf. And the slope between the two, about 40 feet difference in height, was a very erodible slope and rather delicate. And then it was a seepage area that was very important. Next slide, please. There's the upland remnant conifer forest. This is a leftover from the lumbering days. These were second growth, fully matured conifers. Then the lower shelf was the farm and nursery. This was open for development. If you look across the freeway to the south, to the bottom of this sheet, you can see what is being done with the same kind of land circumstance. You can see what's coming. And then the steep slope between is in blue, and that was the more delicate slope. Next slide. We worked on this for the better part of a year, working with the college, the community college, who did not want to be near a university, and working with a university who did not want to be with a community college. They were adversaries and balked at every move, especially in terms of a typical kind of campus development, which would be a central green of some kind, and then development around that as a typical way of solving a problem. Next slide, please. One day, after a year of these efforts that didn't sell and wouldn't work, there was a decision that came up by a young engineer, aquatic engineer, who was working with our team, and we were all in shirt sleeve mode, working in a room. And he said, well, why don't we reverse what we've been trying to do? We've been trying to save that delicate slope while the campus used the upper 35 acres to remove the conifers and build buildings, and the bottom 85 acres developed for buildings and parking lots. Why don't we reverse that and build the campus where the blue is, take the seepage and put it into its own ponded area, and build on that stripe. So that little diagram that the arrow is pointing to was a little pencil diagram that was done that morning, about 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning. And lo and behold, everybody began to say, well, given this, we could do this and we could do that. And we reversed the idea. We built the campus on 15 acres, or mainly probably about, in the end, 30 acres, and retained in perpetuity the upland conifer and the lower wetland. We made it a wetland, returned the stream to its original form. Next slide, please. So that was the diagram that sold everything. The community college didn't have to be near the big guy, University of Washington, and vice versa. They had a direct, clear campus line between them. Center point was the library and an environmental study center. And everything fell in place. The stream was restored to its original physics. Next slide, please. And we began to build. So there's the stream in its early stages. There's the campus being built in one long line, and the conifer forest remnant is still buffering the neighborhood next door. Next slide, please. And this is the result about 10 years ago. Now it's a fully developed wetland zone. You can see where the campus is in the line of development that I was mentioning. If you'll notice, there's a tiny little white line that comes out from the library in the center and extends into the wetland. That is an environmental study dock. It's where you go out into the conditions that are natural. And there are various pockets along that walkway that are study points. It was done. It was the advocates probably were coming largely from the student body to come from the University of Washington. The advocates for doing what we have done here. It was needed to have those kinds of advocates. So a win-win again, a very rare victory. They don't come much, and often they are just too hard to develop. Just look across the freeway and see what would have been done to that land. It was able to do it. They could have legally done it. And it was being proposed. And this one idea, one morning, changed it all. And it was drawn with a pencil. So with that, I'm going to let it go. I know I've probably overdone my time, but I appreciate the chance to be here, and I thank you no end.
Well, thank you, Bill. That was quite a delight to hear this history of yours, as well as hear about your framework. Now, before we get started on Q&A, and I'm going to I would like to bring in Joe and Todd and any of your other colleagues on the call in a minute for the Q&A. But before we start, I want to acknowledge that this lecture today is extra special. It's the Vern Budge Lecture. And I want to make sure we take a moment to honor Vern Budge, and then we'll start our Q&A.
Yeah, so to tell you a little bit about the Vern Budge Lecture, this lecture recognizes Vern Budge, a distinguished alumni and professor of the Department of Landscape Architecture and Environmental Planning. Vern received his Associate of Science from Snow College in 1959 and his Bachelor's of Landscape Architecture from Utah State in 1965, and his M.L.A. from the University of Illinois in 1967. He is a charter member of Sigma Lambda Alpha, the National Honor Society for Landscape Architects. Vern was a full-time faculty member in the Department of Landscape Architecture and Environmental Planning for 36 years, from 1967 to 2003, and was one of the major participants in building the department's national reputation for quality education. Vern's teaching focus included advanced design studios, landscape construction, and a variety of courses in site design and planning. He was often recognized as the department's Teacher of the Year and Advisor of the Year. Much of his success in the classroom came from his belief that practical application of classroom information is the best teacher. And there are a number of landscape projects throughout the community and university that are the results of his efforts in this area. Throughout his tenure at USU, Vern was actively engaged in the private and public practice of landscape architecture throughout the US and Canada. A number of the projects in which he has been a major contributor have received regional and national recognition for excellence in design and planning by professional associations such as ASLA and APA. We are pleased to have Vern in attendance with us today and would like to express his appreciation for our speakers for sharing their experience and expertise with us.
And each year we have a Vern Budge Lecture, and we try to find someone whose work relates to his. And I can't say there are many that exemplify Vern's work in the way that you do, Bill. And it's an honor to have you today. And we've got a load of questions for you.
Good.
And like I said, I'd love to bring in Todd and Joe and any other colleagues on the call that would like to ask you some questions. But I'll start it off here. We have a question from a student who says, when you were talking earlier about that iterative process, and there's that split sometimes between vision and that pragmatic execution, and you talked about how sometimes designers may skip over and go right to the implementation itself. But what advice do you have when new designers especially get stuck in that earlier phase and want to continue to vision and what many of our professors call that analysis paralysis? How do you get past that?
Right. You bring up an old term that we agonized over in the 60s, analysis paralysis. I think the key to avoiding that is working quickly and even in confusion. There's something about the disorder of creative work that hurries things along. We know that you can overdo analytic efforts because of the timing of development. You can't spend 3 years doing something and to get ready to spend a year on it. It's out of order. So I think working fast, working with the knowledge that you need to sew together the first part and the last part. They need to be sewn together. That means those in the second part, the more pragmatic part need to be involved in the visioning. And the visionaries need to be involved in understanding the cost implications and the difficult pragmatic moments that are to come. They'll get serious pretty fast. So we know the problem of analysis paralysis, and there are ways to avoid it.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice to hear. I think whenever there's a fast pace in studio, it seems to, there's not so much attachment to the work, and it's easier to move through things quickly.
Well, just to add one little tiny comment on that, the way to learn that is to have it introduced in school and practice quick, and some people call it quick and dirty, but there's a book out that I find very encouraging called Quick and Nimble by Bryant. The 200 different CEO leaders in the country that were interviewed with the question, what would you do in that you're already successful for keeping success in the next few years? They said, well, it's not our good process. It's about the people who run the process. It's about culture. That was almost unanimous among 200 CEOs. Be careful, they're saying. Process isn't the end. It's a means. Okay.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'll be sure to share that book with our students and everyone who's on this talk. Another question we had for you came from the advancement board, and they had been talking about the importance of networking and realized, that you're an expert kind of in this area. And they were curious if you have any advice for our students about how you keep track of your network and how you were introduced to other professionals in the field when you were just starting out.
Great question. And I can tell you quickly that my ability to keep track of people today is much more difficult than I used to experience. I don't know how you do it today, but the key thing is the attitude. Do you want to connect? And the difficulty of connecting is minor. The key is, do you want to, and how badly do you want to, and do you see a reason for it? And if that reason is clear and you really want to do it, there are many ways to skin the cat.
Yeah,
that's good advice. I see Joe he started to talk, and Joe, I noticed your microphone's on. If you'd like to unmute yourself, I think you have a question.
Bill, to the issue of analysis paralysis, I've seen all of those little diagrams that you started before, that you started with. I've seen those before.
I know you have.
But this time you talked about the type of decision or the purpose of various stages in each one of those.
Yeah.
And when you write your book, you should elaborate on those, because if you had a purpose or intent with each one of the phases in those diagrams, and one evaluated whether you've achieved that intent,
Yeah,
then you have a basis for moving on.
yeah,
And
good point. Good
again,
point.
I've seen those diagrams before, but I've never heard you explain in each one of those linear lines the purpose of what each
Yeah.
one of those
Yes,
are attending, and I think that'd be very useful.
you're right on. I thank you for that. I think you should come and help me do that.
I'll also add
Um,
that Bill
If
has,
you have a mask,
He didn't hear me.
oh,
did you hear that, Joe? He wants you to come help and put that together.
well, now that I've got my mask and my shots, I will.
I want to also mention to all of our audience that Bill has provided us with a more thorough file of additional slides and images. So in addition to this video, which will be posted on our website, there is more detailed slides that will be provided as a file that's downloadable for students and faculty.
Very good. Thank you for that.
Todd, I think you've got a question. Oh,
I got to unmute, Todd.
As is typical, it's a little bit editorial, but so I'm kind of reverberating or resonating during Bill's talk. And the thing that got me emotional about what he chose to talk about was the humbleness and the humility of the projects that he showed. And I have, in my own work experience, working with fancy pants universities and community colleges. And I have to tell you that community colleges are one of the most heartfelt kind of missions that you can engage in. And it brought me back to, I guess, when I was in school at Utah State, the altruism and the magnanimity of the professors was extraordinary, exceptional. And I think I entered the workforce at a time when our economy and the luxury of landscape architecture and the expansiveness of it was a lot about pretty elite clients and elite projects. And now I find that there's a group of students that are on this call who are asking the profession to respect Green New Deal, to address equity, to address a lot of things that maybe we forgot a little bit about. And so Bill also has worked on some amazing kind of elite projects, I guess you might say. But what he chose to describe to us were two amazing, elegant, simple projects oriented to a spectrum of values and interests that have always been at the heart of our profession. So thank you, Bill.
You bet.
And I think it's really inspiring for me. I experienced a completely different culture in my undergrad, being in studios and architectural studios, and to come here at Utah State and see how humble and friendly and just refreshing the culture is. Getting to meet you, Bill, and seeing your mentors and how you've inspired the professors that are here now really shows me where that comes from. And like you said, it's like creating a culture and a community that reinforces these ideas. So I think that's really special.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. We have another question from a student that I want to address. And they were curious, looking at all the sketching and drawing you do and how important you realize that it is. They were curious to know who is the most influential artist, who has been the most influential artist on you throughout your life. Yeah.
There's one that wasn't everything, but it was the beginning of being thrilled when you see it. and it's the work of Ted Kautsky. Kautzzy, I believe. Ted Kautsky. Pencil.
Mm.
And he showed me where to put the whites. I never knew that. But when you look Ted Kautsky up and see some of his simple drawings in pencil, you can see the power of the pencil at work. I love that.
That's great. It's great advice too. I see that he is big in watercolors, and that's something that's often taught in watercolors is you have to save those white spaces because you don't get them back if you color over them.
Did you already look that up?
Yeah, they're
Did
beautiful.
you know?
We'll put them in the chat so everyone can go to the link.
Okay.
Now you talk about these win-wins, Bill, and it really sounds like it is the essence of this work and this long lineage of work that you have behind you. And you shared that two of them today and that they were 40 years apart and that they're pretty rare in our practice. Any last tips for how to achieve those win-wins and stay on track for those?
Well, I don't know. I don't know how to answer that in the sense that one of those projects, I was working late in the office and somebody come by and knocked on my door. How do I explain that? So, there's no system to that. But somebody knew we were around, and somebody knew our attitudes that night and took enough trouble in the light rain of a spring morning evening to come by and knock on the door. Who might knock on your door next is the question.
Yeah, and will you open it? Yeah, that's really great. Well, I'd like to open it up to anybody else that has questions. If anybody wants to unmute themselves. And
I see Craig raising his hand. Craig Johnson, would you like to unmute yourself?
There you go.
There we
This is the Craig that I know and love.
Yeah. He's right back at you, Bill. Appreciate that. The one thing I was thinking when you started at the very beginning, talking about shades and artists, and I've been trying to think of who did I watch on a 16mm film at Michigan State sketching that old building in the barn. Remember the old barn building with the vines growing on it?
I remember.
Ted Kautsky, and I said, holy smokes. I mean, he was amazing.
Yes.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to comment on is just especially the community college project. And Todd touched on a few of the things, but boy, there is not a better thing that I can think of, a better example that sort of made all your points in one.
Yeah.
You look at it and here's two college groups not agreeing on anything. You're looking at a slope that could come unbuttoned in a minute. You got a beautiful second growth forest still alive, and you got this wetland that's been channelized. And one of the neat things was, and you brought it up and you talked about it before this particular case study, is the importance of community and interacting. And your comment was, well, there was an engineer, i.e. an engineer one morning that had, well, he said, maybe we could put it on that slope. You can engineer things to deal with it. And guess what? Bill does a drawing that took him about a minute and a half, maybe. And everyone looks at it and says, oh my God, why didn't we think about this sooner? And then, as you go from, okay, that was farmland and you had the flume for the chucking the trunks downstream. And all of a sudden you see what a hydrologist would have put in place with all the curvilinear stuff of the old stream channel.
It's the way it used to be.
Hydrology, and then you go from that because the first one was just going through the fields, and all of a sudden the whole thing is a wetland. And I'm thinking, there's no better way than example I can think of that really tied all those things together so beautifully. It just made all your points.
Well, you know, just a quick note that when that plan was presented to all the constituents, including the college and the university and the state of Washington, they stood up and applauded. They all applauded.
Doing that. I mean, it's tremendous.
Yeah. And it was a case where there was 130 acres, we might have been able to save 30 acres and build on the 100, and it reversed.
Yep.
We saved 100 and built on 30.
Yeah, and then
We got applause.
And as you pointed, all you had to do is look south across the highway and see what was coming. Is that a different world or not? I just.
You got it.
Brings the social thing, the environmental thing, the interdisciplinary coordination and interaction thing all together, and shows you what can happen when you do what you talked about, and you end up literally with a win-win, beyond a win-win.
Yes.
So anyway, it's
Thank
good
you,
to
Craig.
see you, and I really appreciate that. Case study was terrific.
Thank you.
I think we have time for one more question. If there's anyone else out there in our audience that would like to close us out for the evening. And I also want to just, again, thank you, Bill, for joining us for our final lecture, our Vern Budge Lecture this year.
Thank you for inviting me. I'd like to say one more thing about what I have tried to cover tonight. I don't know how many more times I can give lectures like this. It's hard work now for me, but what I wanted to do is to point out the beauty of design. Design is not an object. It's a process. And it's a process that never goes away. From the beginning of an idea of something to be addressed in terms of a problem to the very end of building it, it's all design. It doesn't split up into planning and design or planning and engineering and design. That's not how you see it. It all melds together into an integrative whole. And until it does that, we're going to have failures. It has to be an integrative whole. Okay. Sorry for my preaching.
Well, as we call this is your testimony, Bill.
This is my
And I
testimony.
think you chose the right career path. With one thing I can say is when I think of careers that take that holistic vision and approach, landscape architects really do, like you showed earlier in your diagram, live and work and collaborate in so many disciplines.
Yeah. No question.
Bill, keep lecturing. I could listen to you forever. Really, the clarity and the eloquence is just spellbinding. And I just really want to thank you for joining us. You've really enriched our series, and we look forward to ongoing contact with you. And please give my best to your son, Mark.
I will do that. Thank you, Todd.
Thank you.
Oh.
All right. And on that note, I know we're approaching 7 p.m. for you over there, Bill. So we're gonna sign off so you can make sure you get your dinner and have a wonderful Friday evening.
Will do. Thank you, guys. Good to see you, Joe and Todd and everybody.
Good job.
Everybody have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.